to the On the Air podcast, a companion to On the Air magazine, a bi-monthly magazine from ARRL for beginner to intermediate ham radio licensees. I'm your host and the editor of On the Air, Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY. Every month, the On the Air podcast extends material found in On the Air magazine to help you learn about the many things that the ham radio hobby and service has to offer. The On the Air podcast is sponsored by ICOM for the love of ham radio. Welcome to the December 2025 episode. The November-December 2025 issue of On the Air featured an article called 10 Tips for Programming Your 2-Meter Handheld, which offered practical advice to get you started on that daunting but crucial task. Today we are joined by Karin Thompson, KD4DXX of RT Systems, a company that specializes in amateur radio programming. Karin has been a ham for 35 years and has worked for 30 of those years with programming radios. She is here to talk a bit more about the ins and outs of programming your handheld and also why it is so important to know your way around your radio. Welcome, Karin.
Thank you, Becky. I appreciate you letting me be here with you today on your podcast, and I hope that we can shed some light for your viewers and let them be more comfortable with their radios. Realize they're not going to hurt it. They're not going to break it. It's just something new to learn about.
Yep, and once you're familiar with it, it's not so new and it's not so scary. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
So, Karin, one of the first things that hams face after getting licensed is buying a radio. And we know that for a lot of us, that first radio is a handheld of some kind, usually for the 2-meter band. How do you recommend beginning to familiarize yourself with a new radio like a 2-meter handheld?
Well, Becky, I'm actually going to step you back one step, and that is that they should really do a little research before they invest in that first 2-meter handheld. And they think, hey, I'm new at this. How can I research anything? But they may find out that all their local repeaters or their favorite local repeater is in the 440 band. And so many radios today, even the inexpensive radios, come in 2-meter 440 versions. And so rather than investing money in 2 meters only, which is moderately limited, do the research first. Think about what you want to do with this radio and then investigate the market and what is there out there and what are your friends using and other things like that, rather than just saying, oh yeah, this one looks good, and then all of a sudden chunking down a big chunk of change and realizing it's not the one you wanted, or you need it to do more or less and that kind of thing.
Okay, so think about what you want to do with the radio, research what kind of repeaters are in your area so that you're buying a radio that can do what you need it to do based on where you live and what you want to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we don't want folks who are buying a new handheld to do what so many of us do. We buy the radio and it goes into a drawer. Because looking at that thing with all of the buttons and switches can be kind of daunting. So what do you recommend folks do first once they've got that new radio, take it out of the box? How do you begin to acclimate yourself to your new radio?
Okay, well, as your article said, the first thing you do is charge it. Absolutely. Because it's funny, they can be on, but almost not functioning when their batteries get low enough. But the very first thing that we do with any radio we get out of the box, and that I recommend for everybody, is to figure out how to change between memory mode and VFO. Now, memory mode and VFO, I'm going to show off my age here. You may remember radios in cars that you used to turn the knob and the little dial would go across. That's like VFO mode. And then when you found the station and tuned it in just like you wanted it, you pulled out the little slot and pushed it back in, and that saved it to memory. And that is the best example I have, and I hope the younger generation understands that. But that's the best example I have of VFO in memory. But on these little radios, you need to be able to recognize on the display what mode you're in. First, you got to figure out the buttons to push. On ICOM radios, there's usually an M or an MR button, so it's fairly obvious. But then you have to know, well, how do I know where I am? And recognize your display. Is there a VFO showing? Is there an M showing? Does that M display go away? If I turn the knob, how does it act differently? We get calls all the time. I turn the knob and it does nothing. Well, more than likely you're in memory mode and you've got one channel. And so it has no place else to go. But it's that simple. You're in memory mode, and that answers your question. You're in memory mode. All the initial programming is done in VFO. So you have to know how to go back and forth between them. And you should always know that, because as the hobby progresses and your activities progress, you may go to an emergency situation or just an exercise, and the first thing the head of communications does is look around at you and go, oh, that repeater went down and we've put a temporary up over here on this frequency with this tone. And if you're standing there going, what do I do now? You become useless. You become somebody who does a completely different task. And you're so helpful as a communicator. You need to know how to do that. You need to know how to tune to those frequencies.
Yep. And you need to know how to do that before you get into that situation where you're deployed and suddenly the repeater you thought you were going to be able to use is out of commission.
Right, right. Yep. Exactly.
Okay. So, so you mentioned charging. Very important to do that first. You're not going to get anywhere without that. And VFO versus memory mode, and the car radio analogy is very, very good. I've been in that situation myself with handhelds where I'm thinking, you know, I was just able to do this, this, and this with the radio, and all of a sudden I can't. What is wrong? And I realize I'm in the wrong mode. So very, very important basic to know the difference between VFO and memory mode. How much would you say of getting familiar with a radio is reading the manual and matching it up, you know, looking at that diagram and matching it up with the buttons and switches on your radio, versus how much of it might be just experimenting, playing around with the radio? As you said, you're really not going to break it, so you should just dig in and try stuff out. What balance between reading the manual and playing around do you suggest?
Well, it's a little of both. One of the greatest conversations I had during COVID or shortly after COVID, because we were open and we were helping people, was an older man that said what he did to entertain himself was to read all the manuals on his radios. And he was amazed at all the things his radios did that he never knew. And so here's this whole new world of amateur radio that he was going to get to play with because he read his manual. But back to the beginning of it, absolutely, looking at the manual, looking at how the buttons are labeled, because you go on to another function and somebody may look around at you and go, yeah, press the MR key. The what? Well, get familiar with the face of that radio and with what that manual says those buttons do. But I'm one that learns, I read and do and read and do and read and do. So read a little bit of it, highlight the buttons you're supposed to press, and
Mm-hmm.
see if you can get the radio to do. The one I can think of is getting it in and out of bank mode or changing banks. Just push the buttons and see what the radio does.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, read and do. So that is probably the best way to learn it and the strongest way to know more about what the radio does, because the more you know about the radio and its organization. Does
Mm-hmm.
it have banks? Does it not have banks? Does it have one set of memory channels or two set of memory channels? And these kind of things. The more you know about that, the more you can collect your repeater information, get it into your radio in such a way that then when you're ready to use it, you're not labored through hundreds of channels that you have no use for in that
Mm-hmm.
situation. So,
Yeah.
yeah, um, you got to take advantage of what that little device has for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, as far as getting down to programming does, what programming takes, it sounds like there's a level of familiarity that you can build up with your radio before you even start trying to program, by playing around with it, by reading and then doing incrementally through the manual. So you mentioned that when you get into programming, an important thing to know is what you want to do with your radio. Can you talk a little bit about how knowing what you want to do with your radio applies to programming your radio?
Sure, absolutely. The short answer with all radios is you want to talk to people.
Mm.
You want to
Yep.
talk to people, you want to make new friends, you want to help in emergencies. So start with, so many people we talk to, they want to put in 1,000 memory channels. Well, what are you gonna do with them?
Yep.
So start with your local repeaters. There may be 3 or 4 or 5 of them that you scan in VFO and you listen and you find those frequencies. And those are the ones that have activity. And those are probably the ones that you want to find all the pertinent details on and put them into memory first. And you'll go a long way with just 4 or 5 channels. You'll find a
Mm.
lot of people to talk to and a lot of things to do. If you're preparing for emergency communications, like I said, this is what do you want to do with your radio? You might want to program those in a separate bank or at the bottom of your list or at number 200 so that you know when you see 200 come up on the list that you're into those channels and you either want to
Mm.
get out of them or stay in them. Just those kind of identifiers so it's not just a jumble of numbers when you're looking for
Mhm.
something. And if you're talking about building a list because you're traveling,
Mm.
this is where I will attest to the fact that doing programming from the computer comes in,
Mm.
because once you know how to change to VFO, tune to a frequency, make sure your offset is right, turn on a tone, select the right tone value,
Mhm.
save it to memory so you have it. You don't have to do it 1,000 times to prove to somebody that you can do it. So
Yeah.
while there is a place for computerized programming, it should not be our first resource. We are ham radio operators, and by the privilege of our license, we are allowed to manipulate our radios
Yep.
from the buttons and knobs on the face. This is a privilege that we all should understand. And hey, what's more fun than getting a new toy and turning the knobs and pushing the buttons and seeing what it does next?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so You mentioned computer programming, and I agree. You know, knowing how to manually program your radio is a basic skill that we all, as licensed hams, should have, and have well in advance and be familiar with it on whatever radio or radios we've got in our collection before we're in a situation where we really need to have access to the radio and know what we're doing with it. What kind of situations do you think are especially good for computer programming a radio?
Like I said, the biggest one is if you're taking a trip and you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
organize a big chunk of data. Um, that's that's the biggest one it's for.
Mm.
Setting up some of the more complicated setups, D-Star.
Mm.
D-Star is the least complicated of all of them. But then there's DMR, and Fusion is really simple. It does not take a whole lot of setup. But the others where they're particulars, that's done so much more easily when you can see it on the computer screen,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
rather than trying to figure out where you are in the radio. Setting up banks, you can see what you're doing rather than wondering, oh, did I get that in bank 1 or bank 3? Where did it go? That kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So there are a lot of mistakes that can be made with the more advanced settings on these radios, that it's easier when it's on the computer screen and you can see what you're doing and you can rearrange if you get it wrong, these kind of things. So
Yeah.
there is a place for it. And like I said, it sounds funny coming from me since this is where we've spent our lives. You've got to know how to do this from the face of the radio.
Yeah.
We've come full circle now.
Yeah.
Um, uh, you've got to know how to do it from the face of the radio.
Okay. So yeah, I mean that's real preparedness. You know, and as important as it is to know how to program your radio, a lot of us don't know how to do it because, you know, it can be daunting. There are so many different makes and models of radios. There are a few different methods of programming. Sometimes they're different from brand to brand. So how do you suggest a ham breaks down that fear and approaches their radio?
Just remember that programming a radio is a step-by-step process. The first step is to collect your information, which will be frequency, offset, and tone. Those are the important things. Uh, Once you have the information gathered, work with your radio step by step to get those pieces into the radio. So, but just be patient with yourself. That little thing, these little things back here that all
Mhm.
look like radios, no, they're just they're just little computers disguised as radios. So if you struggle with the computer, and I hate to say it, but there are people that do, um, the radio may pose the same kind of problems,
Mm.
but be patient, be easy with it, be easy with yourself. Because I'll warn you, if you fight with the computer, it'll win,
Oh
which is the
yes.
same thing. If you fight with your radio, it will win. Just keep playing with it. You'll be
Mm.
surprised. Reset the radio and try again. And if it
Mm.
doesn't work, reset the radio and try again. Every time you do it, you will learn one more thing so that the next time you do it, you'll get closer to your end goal. And that's the easiest way to do it. Break it,
Mhm.
keep your end spot in sight. But remember, you do it one step at the time. You never step from the beginning to the end without all the steps in between.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I had an experience earlier this year with writing a code plug for a DMR radio, and there I got to a point where I thought I might just have to wipe this and start over. Fortunately, I straightened myself out before then, but I had approached it kind of step by step, very incrementally, so that I felt even if I do have to wipe this and start over, I understand where how I got to the point I got to. So I felt less bad about potentially having to wipe it because I'd been really methodical about stepping into it in the first place. So I did eventually get there, but I was ready to wipe it if I had to.
If you had to, and that's
Yeah.
always an option. All these radios are deep core programmed with their basic brain. And when
Mhm.
you do the reset, it still knows it's a radio. It probably has one or two frequencies programmed into memory. It knows where it's supposed to transmit. It
Mhm.
knows what features it's supposed to have. So you're not going to hurt it by resetting it.
Yeah.
And just try again, see what happens.
Yeah. Yep, you're not going to hurt the radio, and you're going to learn stuff. You're going to learn these basics that are important for all of us hams to learn.
Right, right. Absolutely. Very important for all of us to learn.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Karin. I really appreciate it.
Well, I have enjoyed talking with you, and I hope your audience has learned a little bit more about their radios and ask questions, keep trying. And I promise you can get these radios to do what you want them to do. I promise. We all can.
Great. Thank you so much, Karin.
You're welcome, Becky. It was good talking with you.
Good talking to you. Thanks again to Karin Thompson of RT Systems for being with us today. We will be back in January with another episode, but in the meantime, I hope you have a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season. 73.